Which Italian American has contributed more to American culture? Frank Sinatra? Joe DiMaggio? How about this guy? Chef Boyardee. Not only was he a real person, he was one of the best Italian chefs of his time. And when he embraced the tin can, he became the numero uno envoy of Italian food to America.
He was the sweetest gentleman you would ever want to meet in your life. He was just as sweet as that photograph that you see on this can here.
Once upon a time, his name was Hector Boiardi, and he came looking for a new life in America. Just one of the 4 million Italian immigrants who flooded into the eastern U.S. around the turn of the century. They settled in eastern cities alongside other immigrants, building ethnic neighborhoods thick with the smells and flavors of the old country. Germans brought hamburgers and hot dogs. Chinese cooks invented Americanized stir-fries like chop suey.
One of the curious dilemmas that Americans and American immigrants face is maintaining a sense of their own dignity as ex-Chinese, Persian, whatever, and also being American. So in that sense, food is an extraordinarily powerful method for uniting the past and your present and future in America.
So Italians raised tomatoes in city window boxes or grew basil in flower pots and olives in their backyards. These were the simple rustic flavors of southern Italy. But the recipes changed in the New World.
When all of the immigrants came to America, the myth of their looking for streets paved with gold was a complete illusion. They were never looking for that in the first place. They were looking for enough to sustain them to eat, because they were starving back in the old country. When they got to the United States, not only did they find streets full of markets, but they found stalls full of vegetables and fruits and meat, so that you could have meat, instead of once every 3 months, you could have meat twice a week, 3 times a week. The idea of having a roast chicken, and everything was bigger. Pizzas got bigger, platters of pasta got bigger, because there was this abundance, and to eat well is to be well.
Italians opened restaurants famous for their generous portions. Still, even into the 1920s, the taste for Italian food was limited to eastern seaboard cities. But that was before Hector. Hector Boiardi came from a large family in northern Italy, near Milan. He arrived in New York in 1913 with his brother Paul. Paul got a job as a maitre d' at the city's famed Plaza Hotel, and soon Hector was working in the Plaza's kitchens. From there, Hector graduated to the genteel Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia, where in 1915 he answered cooking's highest call.
Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, had his wedding reception there. Uncle Hector catered that wedding reception at 18 years old. And he told me the reason for that was because there were 1,500 people in the party. And he said, we can't handle it. He told them, look, you let me handle it, I'll show you how to do it.
From West Virginia, Boiardi moved on to take a hotel chef job in Cleveland. But in 1924, he quit to open his own restaurant at last. Although he was from the north of Italy, Hector served the southern Italian foods that were popular in New York and Boston, and pasta and tomatoes were just as appealing to mid-American taste buds as they were in New York. His restaurant was a quick success.
So every once in a while, somebody would say, Hector, can I take a little sauce home with me? You know what I mean? I can't get here tomorrow night, or I'm going to have a little company, do you mind? Well, he said, okay. Well, then eventually they kept on doing it. They came back and they'd say, well, you know, Hector, you know, it's not the same as at the restaurant. What's the problem? Well, he says, you're using the wrong pasta. You got to use the pasta with the semolina flour. Okay. And Then they come back again, you know, Hector still wasn't right.
By 1927, Boiardi was sending his favorite customers home with the whole works. A jar of his signature sauce, a bag of real pasta, and a packet of the proper cheese. The first packaged spaghetti dinner. A dinner tasty enough that a friend of Boiardi smelled profits. He proposed a simple business plan to distribute it around Ohio.
What we'll do is simple. He says, I'll get some truckers together. You know, you cook for them. So they packaged. And they went to these truckers. The truckers enjoyed the food, of course, as our Hector cooked for them. And one trucker says, I could sell 12 cases. You know, at that time, there's local grocery stores and everything. I could sell 15 cases. I could sell 20. And that was the beginning. And it just took off.
Chef Boiardi was smart enough to realize that Italian food, which previously had been a very ethnic food that you really only had in big cities where there are immigrant families and there were pizzerias and little Italian restaurants, but you didn't find that across the United States. And one of the main reasons was that it was not available.
It was about to be. Back in New York, Hector's brother Paul served Hector's spaghetti dinner to a Plaza Hotel patron named John Hartford, who just happened to own the nationwide chain of A&P supermarkets. Hartford was impressed, and Hector was about to go national in a can. Cans weren't exactly new. The French had invented canning around 1800 to feed Napoleon's army. The British started making round metal cans in 1810. But the process was slow and expensive. The first cans were cut and soldered by hand. Often they were so thick they could only be opened with a hammer and chisel. It was American industry that created cheap modern canning, spurred on first by the tremendous supply needs of the westward covered wagon migrations and then the Civil War. By the 1870s, an American factory could crank out 20,000 sterile cans of food a day. Boiardi wasn't the first to can spaghetti either. During the First World War, when Italy was one of our allies, the American Army had fed canned spaghetti to the troops. But when Boiardi hooked up with A&P, the timing was perfect. First of all, a convenient, easy-to-use can opener had just come on the market, the butterfly wheel, patented in 1936 and still a standard design today. More importantly, shoppers had come to trust canned soup and vegetables as labor-saving and nutritious.
In my house, when my father's comment about, say, green beans was not when were these picked or which farm stand did you get them, he said, what brand are these? And my father was a grocer, and my mother, since my father often brought the cans that had lost their labels in the grocery store home, my mother often didn't know the answer. I mean, she hadn't even known they were green beans, right? When she opened it up, it could have been rutabaga for all she knew.
Boiardi seized his moment. He was going to offer the bulk of Americans an exotic canned food they had never tried before.
This could be packaged and poured out of a can, heated up, and poured into a plate, whether you were in Petoskey, Michigan, or Idaho, or any place else. So this was the first time that Italian food, per se, became very popular throughout the United States because of Chef Boiardi's invention.
That was the beginning of pasta. He was the beginning, there was no question about it.
In 1937, Boiardi found an empty silk factory in central Pennsylvania and secured a promise from local farmers to stop growing corn and raise 1,000 acres of tomatoes instead.
This area here is where they processed the tomatoes. And when I was a kid, I used to come here with a salt shaker. And I don't know how many tomatoes I thought I could eat.
Hector roamed his immense new kingdom, controlling every detail of the cooking, even raising his own mushrooms on trays in the factory basement.
The only food that he ever made at the plant was the food that he served at home for his family. He never changed anything.
Except one thing. He changed the name on the label.
He was a very proud individual. And he loved his family very much, and he was very proud of his name. And he wanted to make sure that when he arrived that everyone would pronounce it properly. So when he, on the can, he put it BOY-AR-DEE.
Hector Boiardi's career peaked with the Second World War when he won a huge contract to make C and K rations for Allied troops. In 1943, Chef Boyardee became the second company awarded the coveted Army and Navy E Award for excellence. 3 years later, the chef sold out and turned his factory over to a large food conglomerate. There were still many Italian discoveries yet to come to the American palate. Risotto, carpaccio, cream sauces, and a whole menu of northern Italy. But the ground had been laid by the grinning gourmet on the side of the can. And his name, with a few minor alterations, has been pronounced perfectly for 70 years.
A crisis situation out of control.